In 1949, a few very important things happened in the world. The Russians exploded their first atomic bomb. The Cold War was getting warmer, and audiences in America were treated to a very special movie. This movie was promised to be action-packed, dramatic, and exciting. It was meant to scare and entertain Americans. It was meant to send a message. We now know this film as being called The Woman on Pier 13. But in 1949, this movie was known by a different title. This classic film was originally called I Married a Communist. Today, we're going to talk about this iconic film and discuss how it reflects national ideas about communism, fear, and the role of the government in media. But first, in order to really appreciate this movie, you have to understand the general thoughts and feelings of Americans during this era. Communism was spreading throughout the world, and Americans feared that they would be the next country to fall to the communist regime. And because communists now had nuclear weapons, Americans weren't just afraid of being taken over by the enemy. They were fearful of total nuclear annihilation. This fear was so widespread that people of this time didn't just wonder if they would be attacked, they wondered when. This crippling anxiety impacted how Americans lived their daily lives. Americans learned that the dreaded communists were hiding in our nuclear programs, our neighborhoods, and even our government. And so naturally, American citizens became increasingly suspicious of each other. Who could be trusted? Who was a communist? So, if you were a patriot, you were doing everything you could to make sure communist activities weren't happening here in the good old USA. And if you were a patriot in Hollywood, you were making movies about how communism is bad. See, the government understood the power that the media had on the public, and they feared that secret communist agitators would also see how the media could be used to influence unsuspecting Americans. So because of this, the US government created the House Un-American Activities Committee, with the intention of finding communist plots and shutting them down. This government organization set its sights to Hollywood, where it encouraged the production of anti-communist films and shut down any film that seemed a little too left-leaning.
Fear of communist subversive activities has developed into hysterical frenzy which grows daily. Appointed by Congress to investigate, Chairman Parnell Thomas opens the hearing.
Investigating alleged communist influence and infiltration in the moving picture industry must not be considered or interpreted as an attack on the industry itself.
While this may not have been a deliberate attack on the movie industry itself, this government intervention could be interpreted as an attack on free speech. By actively controlling what movies could be produced and ensuring that the messages in these films aligned with American values, the US government was essentially taking part in a censorship campaign. Not only were films shut down, but people working in Hollywood were also put on the Hollywood blacklist, where their careers were ended due to suspicion of communist ties. Some of them fled the country in order to keep their freedom, and others were actually thrown in jail. Keep in mind, very little evidence was needed to brand someone as a communist. This was essentially a witch hunt. Enter the movie I Married a Communist. The cast is great. The plot is shaky, and audiences weren't impressed. The movie was a total flop in theaters, and it lost the producers tons of money. First, let's get the general idea of the plot. Brad and Nan are a newly married couple that have only known each other for like 2 weeks.
But Brad, you know absolutely nothing about me. What I'm really like.
Well, it's time I found out.
But Brad...
Honey, you talk too much.
It's worth mentioning that this movie is not meant to be a comedy, but it certainly has its moments.
How about cutting in, Mac?
Yeah, how about it?
Okay, let's get back to the actual plot of this movie. While Brad is a hardworking patriot now, it is revealed that he used to be a member of the Communist Party in his younger days. I guess Nan should have asked about his previous political affiliations before agreeing to marry him.
I married you knowing very little about you, but I trusted you.
He is blackmailed by the Communist Party and is forced to do their bidding. This movie has it all. There's drama, there's violence, and there's communist mischief. But honestly, the details of the plot aren't that important, because this movie wasn't really made to tell a story, it was made to communicate a message. This movie plays up on the fear that commies are lurking around every corner. Characters that appear to be normal Americans are revealed to be secret communists with nefarious plans. These friendly people at the party? Communists with an agenda. The carnival worker who is lurking in the background? A communist agent. The new girl you've been dating? She's commie scum. This film also shows audiences that communists are clearly the bad guys. By depicting them like gangsters, they show the viewer that communists are the villain. But by making them unreasonable and violent, they show that communists are almost subhuman.
I tell you, I don't know anything about...
Strange, isn't it, how a man will try to turn against his friends and believe he can get away with it? Take him out.
Mr. Banning, I tell you, this is a mistake. I've always been absolutely loyal. I never said anything to anyone.
All right, Johnson.
Even the original title of the film, I Married a Communist, is meant to sound like a horror film. Additionally, this movie sends the message that once you dabble with communism, there is no way to truly escape its grasp. The main character is haunted by the ghost of communist past, and his involvement with the party ruins his life. A character who acts as a communist agent and recruiter recants communism, but she is murdered by a communist party member for turning away from the group. A well-meaning character is indoctrinated into the cult of communism against his knowledge. And when he realizes how he's been brainwashed, he is murdered as well. Again and again, we are shown the death of communists in this movie, sending a very clear, better dead than red message. Some of these deaths are satisfying for the audience, and others are meant to be a warning.
All right. Tell Banning I saw what he wanted me to see.
At its best, this movie is a classic noir film that reflects how American society viewed communism at the time. But at its worst, it's a poorly written propaganda film with a shaky premise and scenes like, well, this.
Oh, God! Don't!
Okay.
Please don't! 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 No! 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 No!
This movie was certainly a product of its time, and to modern audiences, it seems a little too much like obvious propaganda disguised as old Hollywood drama. But this movie emphasizes and illustrates the hatred of communism that was so strong in the Cold War, and it shows how the American government was willing to endorse propaganda to communicate a message of fear.